During my days of insurance defense, I spent one lovely afternoon bickering with counsel for a co-defendant over who would be responsible for paying the $5,000 that was keeping us from settling. We did this while on site at the plaintiff's home for a deposition. Plaintiff was hit by a semi-truck. The truck hit his actual body, on the interstate, and while it managed not to kill him, it tore off an arm and a leg, and shattered most of everything else. He was almost entirely immobile, confined to a power chair that he could barely operate, and confided to us that if he had function in his remaining hand, he'd shoot himself. Oh, the $5,000? It was based on an estimate to renovate his bathroom so that he could actually use it. He'd been peeing and pooping in a bedpan in the living room. I felt like a complete butthole sitting in front of him and arguing about such an insignificant sum. Family law attorney here. I've done plenty of divorces and custody dispute cases, that most stuff doesn't get to me. It's only when the kids are put in a bad situation between one or both of the parents being some type of addicts that really gets to me. One that was especially hard for me was a divorce where I represented dad. Mom was a raging alcoholic that would bring random guys home many nights from the bar while the dad was working. I saw videos and heard phone calls from their little boy calling the dad at work at like 2 a.m. because he was tired, but couldn't go to sleep because mom was playing loud music and had friends over, still partying. I was on the right side of that one, but seeing and hearing that stuff with the little boy really got to me. Not me but a friend who studied law. They helped on a case where the father had shot and killed the mother of his children. The reason why he had shot her was because he was working abroad to earn as much money as he possibly could for his kids, so that they would never have the life he did as a child. He came back to find that she'd spent all the money on drugs and his kids were being abused. I worked on a merger between two large companies that resulted in essentially a monopoly that continues to screw over consumers, including me whenever I use their services, which most consumers are forced to. I represented a mom in a custody case. Both parents fighting for primary. Mom was admittedly a mess and suffering from some mental health issues. Dad took the kid and didn't bring them back for a few months in violation of the order. I got the kid back. Then met with mom and kid and realized kid was doing way better with dad and should be with him. Tried to reason with mom, she didn't listen. Ultimately the child protection office got involved and child was placed with dad. I last saw mom many years ago and she was still not in a super healthy place and child was still with dad. So best ending happened and not because of me. I've only worked as a legal intern, not a lawyer, and I cannot speak in specifics for obvious reasons, but I've dealt with about 8 child assault cases at this point. I helped prosecute most of those, but played a role in the defense on a couple. I can tell you, either which way you're working the case, it's tough. Nothing is more terrifying than reading a young victim's description of being abused at the hands of a trusted family member. Had a case where a guy shot and killed a security guard that slapped him across the face for selling drugs near a store. I knew the guy had done it. It was close to midnight, the crime scene had poor lighting and the shooter wore a hoodie. Only eyewitness that showed up for the trial had told the police at the time of the crime that the suspect was black. The defendant wasn't Caucasian but wasn't black either. That, in my opinion, was the argument that won the jury over. Defendant found not guilty. He thanks me while in tears. His mother and grandmother bring me cake and a thank you note afterwards. Less than a year later I'm watching the news and they're reporting a crime where a crew held up 3 families hostage while robbing their apartments. They beat up the janitor very bad. They tied the families up and locked them in one of the apartment's bathroom while threatening to throw a grenade inside if any of them decided to wisen up. For a brief second one of the robbers looks right into an elevator camera before spray painting it. Close up on the guy's face. I think you can imagine whose face I was looking at. Fresh after law school, I worked on a case where the people involved were sketchy in every possible way. My role was very limited, I was just helping with some securities filings. The problem was that nothing quite added up, and when I brought the discrepancies over to my boss, she just told me to put the information in anyway. She was very friendly with the client, we saw him at our office all the time, as he'd often just drop by to chat and hang. Years later, the company folded, in a manner of speaking, and their clients, many of whom were quite vulnerable, lost hundreds of millions of dollars. I was not at all surprised. My boss was someone whom I had dreamed of reporting for years, for that and other sketchiness, but she was slippery enough never to do anything wrong that didn't carry some level of plausible deniability. Additionally, I'd always felt like I had zero idea of what I was doing as a student and then first-year associate there. Further still, I felt powerless against someone who had built herself quite a reputation within the legal community here, and who had been known to act vindictively toward anyone who crossed her in the past. In any case, I do think about that old file often. It's not the only one we worked on at that old firm that eventually blew up in a bad way. It's also really not great to feel like you may have helped legitimize an entirely, and to me, obviously, fraudulent operation. My experience there definitely jaded me quite a bit, even compared to other junior lawyers. A close relative was a judge in a pretty small town in the 80s. There was a case, drug deal gone bad. I guess one guy went to his dealer's trailer. Guy planned to rob dealer, not only take his drugs but his money as well. Dealer picked up on that plan quickly and pulled out a gun. First guy pulled out his gun as well. Both died, suicide by stupidity, really. The families ended up suing each other for wrongful death. Relatives spent a couple of days going over the law before they arrived in court, each wanting to get rid of the other for money. Relative, while on the bench no less, said something to the effect of they both did society a favor by removing themselves from our society. Early 80s, not a chance for that statement to go viral the way it would now, but you can bet the week following the letters to the editor in the local paper blew up. I only include this because the prosecutor was laughing so hard he had to excuse himself from the room when the judge made the comment. Not me, but my brother is a criminal defense attorney. He worked as a contracted public defender for a few years after starting his own business to get some guaranteed income while building his client base. The catch with these contracts is you're not able to refuse clients. He had to defend a guy that had repeatedly did the unspeakable to his toddler daughter while the mom watched. When I asked him about how he got through it, he said, "When I get to a point where the crime is so heinous that I can't empathize with my client, I switch my frame of thought from how will I get this guy reduced or no time, to how can I ensure this guy won't have a chance at a mistrial." So essentially, he copes by making sure that everyone from the police, to the jailers, to the prosecution team are 100% on the up and up, so that when this guy gets found to be guilty, there's no way he'll get set free on a technicality. Not my case, but at a previous firm, a partner sent out a firm-wide email congratulating his team on a great win. It detailed how their win meant that our client, giant fossil fuel company, wasn't liable for damage to the environment caused by leaks in their pipes. Instead, the taxpayers would be covering the cost. The partner went on to say something to the effect of this saves our client $X billion a year in environmental cleanup and pipe maintenance. For some reason, even though it wasn't my case, that one has always stuck with me. Video editor, not a lawyer. I make lots of tapes for lawyers, harsh depositions, evidentiary stuff, getting to the good stuff in a 12-hour surveillance tape. I have even had to pixelate everyone's face but the suspects in hospital surveillance tape due to HIPAA. Sometimes the state will ask me to recover very bad audio from criminal investigations or see if I can see fraudulent editing on a tape, debunk a James O'Keefe copycat. I don't see the whole case and never know the outcomes. I just get a ton of raw input. Video can lie and so can mine. A thing I felt bad about was working for the defense in a civil suit. New worker had his legs crushed at a loading dock. We get our cameras and are working for the company to show how the loading dock is supposed to be done and all their safety equipment working. They have their best guy to demo the stuff, the old SALT employee. He can't make the safety latches work at 2 of the 3 loading docks. The one that does work doesn't work reliably. It is obvious they never use this stuff. But the video is edited and then it looks like the company and safety equipment are slick and functional, run by the most seasoned pros. I worked for a multinational crypto Ponzi scheme. My bosses were too dumb to understand the product, which clearly seemed pointless. Client flew us business class to several conventions to parade us, the lawyers, in front of prospective customers. My bosses ignored my repeated exhortations to drop them, but decided to be a little cautious and not publicize our arrangement with the client. Soon the scam unraveled and we started getting calls from scammed customers saying that we heard from such and such that we are the lawyer, where the hell is our money? It was finally then that my bosses decided to drop them. Not a specific case, but viewing CP was pretty uncomfortable. As a defense attorney, you would go to the prosecutor's office to view the discovery files as they're prohibited from releasing it outside the office. So you go in and sit down in a small room and a legal secretary brings you the discs with the files on them. On one case, I had to view the files more than once. So imaging rolling and saying, "Hey, need to see these private parts again. Thanks." Also representing parents in juvenile where I was fighting to return kids to pretty broken homes. Most of the time it didn't bother me, but in one case I represented a dad whose baby mama had just had these adorable twins. These parents were absolute scum. A lot of times, the foster families are one small step above the parents themselves, not people I would ever hire to babysit my kids. But in this case, the foster parents were a couple of 30-somethings who I presume couldn't have kids of their own. They would show up to court with the infant twins, and they bought them new dress clothes for each court date. So cute. They wanted to adopt the kids, should the parental rights of the bio parents be terminated, so I felt pretty bad showing up trying to get the kids returned to the dad. I left that job before that case was completed, but I assume it had a happy ending. The judge was never going to return the kids to the parents. So I like to think the couple has them now. One of my coworkers, fellow attorney, was hired by a man in possession of CP to defend him. The guy allegedly used to work for the police and FBI to catch people in possession of CP and trace it back to the source to try to catch the people making it. However, when he retired, he decided he wanted to keep doing it as a vigilante, allegedly. I have no idea if he actually turned anything he found into the police. He got caught when he took his computer in for service at a local shop. We all had big bad feels about this case, to be honest. We all fully believed his story did not add up and thought he was going to jail, but he hired us so we had to throw something at the wall at least. I don't know how the case ended since I quit the firm before the case went to trial, but I came home sick to my stomach every day while I worked on that defense. When I was about to start college back in the 90s, I took a legal receptionist job in a legal defense firm in my little southern town. I would work answering the phones until 1 p.m. and then after that I would tag along with one of the lawyers for a few unpaid hours and watch them do their jobs in court. Everyone was very nice and did me a huge favor because the experience gave me enough information to learn that being a lawyer wasn't for me. It turns out that I can't handle watching people be crushed by the system. I could handle the murder trials, drug charges and real estate squabbling no problem. It was watching poor people get ground up over minor offenses or simple mistakes, little things that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. One particular case stood out to me. There was shooting and a crowd had gathered around the body. A detective was asking people in the crowd if they'd seen anything. Our defendant said yes, when he hadn't seen anything really, but he just wanted to help. He was a simple-minded person, but never formally diagnosed with anything, largely due to the lack of services in my town and the fact that he dropped out of school early. When I met him it was clear that he was a sweet person who really liked people, but was dealing with a low IQ and some reasoning issues. The detective separated our defendant from the crowd and started questioning him. After a few minutes it was clear that the defendant was just giving answers that he thought the detective would want to hear. He really wanted to make the detective happy. Instead of just dismissing the guy, the detective arrested him for giving false information. He had a few minor thefts on his record, again he had reasoning issues, so he was really looking at serious jail time because he talked to the police. Again, this dude just liked talking to people and didn't know better. He had no diagnosis or health records to back up any claim of mental deficiencies, and anything resembling that would cost money he didn't have, or time in a state mental facility. He lived with a relative who was equally broke. His lawyer was contemplating a guilty plea because he'd lied directly to a police officer and admitted it. I left before the case got resolved, but it's the one I still think about. This guy was largely harmless and was likely going to spend at least some time in serious jail, where the outcome would likely have been very bad for him. The thing that stuck with me was how unnecessary it all was. It was suffering for literally no purpose. Putting him in jail was not going to magically give that guy better cognitive skills other than making him distrust people. In some areas of law, you get a bit of everything. I'm in one of those areas. I do not do family law, but I had one case where an ex-husband and ex-wife were against each other. Both were completely fraudulent. Both were trying to use their young daughter against the other. One was a chronic cheater and opportunist, and the other was constantly high or drunk and constantly trying to access his former wife's financials. She was quite well off when they got together. This was not a divorce case, but due to the nature of the case, all attorneys involved were privy to the entire record of their divorce. I feel like our client edged out our opposition very minutely in being a slightly better person, but it was a hollow victory.